Dr. Margaret Hamburg was unanimously confirmed as Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration last year. The second woman to serve in the job, she's a graduate of Harvard Medical School and one of the youngest people ever elected to the Institute of Medicine, an affiliate of the National Academy of Sciences. Prior to heading the FDA, Dr. Hamburg held key positions at the Nuclear Threat Initiative, a foundation dedicated to reducing the threat to public safety from nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Earlier, she served as Assistant Secretary for Policy and Evaluation in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under President Clinton. But in the 1990s, as Commissioner of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, she was celebrated for curbing the spread of tuberculosis, which in the 1990s had resurged as a major public health threat, largely because many patients failed to complete the full course of treatment and the disease became resistant to standard drugs. She faces no challenges from that and other issues today, including the impact of health care reform on her agency, the need for more inspectors for food and drug safety, and more efficient clearances for life-saving medicines, as well as faster response to food safety scares, including the Iowa egg recall this summer. Today, Dr. Hamburg will discuss regulatory science, the science of developing better and new tools, standards, and approaches to assess safety, efficacy, quality, and performance of all FDA-regulated products. Welcome to the National Press Club, Dr. Margaret Hamburg.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I enjoy looking out and seeing some friends and colleagues in the audience. And, of course, it's wonderful to have my parents with me as well. I have to confess that when I first agreed to come give a talk at the Press Club today, I had a very clear idea about what I was going to talk about, and it was going to be about the passage of the new food safety legislation. However, that food safety legislation is still being debated in the halls of Congress, and so instead I decided to talk about another subject close to my heart, the other part of FDA, not food safety, but medical products, and to talk about regulatory science, which is an issue that more and more people are recognizing as critical to progress for patients. We live in a time of huge opportunities to improve health, to translate breakthrough discoveries and innovation into benefits for people, enabling better diagnosis, better treatment, and hopefully new opportunities to prevent or cure disease. We're more poised than ever to deliver the promise of science in the service of patients. But to do so, in my view, will require the advancement and more effective application of regulatory science, the discipline at the very heart of our mission at FDA. If our efforts are to be successful, we will need the full engagement of the scientific community and beyond. This must be a top priority for us at the FDA and for our nation. This is something that actually I hadn't focused on that much before I became FDA Commissioner, but in this role, I have really become profoundly impressed by the importance of advancing regulatory science. And so this afternoon, I'd like to offer some thoughts on this important issue and what FDA can and will do going forward to better serve the public's health and realize the promise of biomedical research. I'm also pleased to announce that today we're releasing a white paper entitled Advancing Regulatory Science for Public Health, a framework for FDA's regulatory science initiative. And this document provides a broad blueprint for progress in the field, as well as our agency's role in promoting this progress. And let me begin by making sure that we're all on the same page about what is meant by regulatory science. Some of you have probably heard me talk about this before. Some of you have probably worked on related issues. Some of you probably have no idea what I mean when I say regulatory science. But I'm referring to the science and tools needed to assess and evaluate a product's safety, efficacy, quality, and performance. Regulatory science involves the development of new methods, standards, and models that we can use to speed the development, review, approval, and ongoing oversight of medical products. Science underlies the very foundation of the Food and Drug Administration. And even today, a century after Teddy Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act that led to the creation of our agency, our goal at the FDA remains to embrace our origins as a science-based agency that relies on data-driven decision-making to promote and protect the health of the public. But today we sit at a critical juncture. Science and technology are changing our world in dramatic and far-reaching ways. We're seeing an explosion of knowledge and capabilities emerging from many domains of research and from around the globe. But do any of us believe that we have adequately delivered on the opportunities of science today? Though science and technology have progressed rapidly, we have not seen the equivalent progress in treatments and solutions for many of the diseases and conditions that afflict our friends, neighbors, and families. For example, we've been fighting a war on cancer since it was so declared in the National Cancer Act of 1971. 40 years later, many cancers are still difficult to treat, and some are incurable. And if you're diagnosed with cancer today, especially one of the more complex, elusive forms, the standard best practice treatments you receive from your doctor will likely include toxic drugs that were approved for treatment more than 20 years ago. In another realm, there's increasing alarm about the problem of antibiotic resistance, and we worry with good cause. Today, antibiotic resistance mechanisms have been reported for virtually all known antibacterial drugs currently available for clinical use, which affects everything from global infectious diseases to ear infections in school children to staph infections in locker rooms. People actually talk today about a potential return to the, quote, pre-antibiotic era, unquote, where we no longer have effective tools to treat serious infectious disease. Clearly, we must encourage more judicious use of these important drugs through improved infection control, rational prescribing, and better patient compliance. But even if we improve these practices, resistant bacteria will continue to develop. No matter what, we need new and better drugs, and we need them now. Yet the research and development pipeline is distressingly low. The number of newly approved antibiotics, not just new formulations of previously existing drugs, has fallen steadily since the 1980s. And the range of new antibiotics is disturbingly limited in terms of the types or classes of antibiotics available and the diseases that they can treat. Overall, the reality is that billions of dollars have been invested in biomedical research. In 2008, more than $80 billion by the private sector and more than $30 billion in the National Institutes of Health, an effort that is clearly imperative for medical progress. And we've witnessed the resultant discoveries that hold major promise of therapeutic advance in fields as diverse as genomics, synthetic biology, stem cells, and nanotechnology. But right now, we lack the ability to effectively translate many of these developments into vital products for those who need them. The number of new therapies is actually in the decline, while the costs of bringing them to market have soared. So to put it simply, there's a troubling gap between advances in science and available patient care. We need to build a bridge across this gap, and that bridge, in my view, is regulatory science. A bench scientist may develop a new approach to a disease. A clinician may be able to show that it can work. But regulatory scientists must help develop the knowledge and tools to translate discovery and innovation into those products that hold so much promise. We cannot take advantage of the breakneck speed of biomedical research unless we also emphasize innovation in regulatory science. Just as biomedical research has evolved over the past few decades, regulatory science must also evolve in important and in powerful ways. Regulatory science is an essential part of our overall scientific enterprise, yet it has been underappreciated and, frankly, underfunded. Because of this, we've been unable to apply the best possible science and technology to the tasks before us. And we are left relying on 20th century approaches for the review, approval, and oversight of the treatments of the 21st century. So now is the time to move forward. A robust field of regulatory science will allow us to effectively and efficiently translate many of those breakthroughs into therapies and cures. It can enable us to use our knowledge of biological pathways and gene variants to help eliminate ineffective drug candidates earlier in the pipeline. It will foster the use of advanced genetic data and biomarkers to find faster paths to disease targets. It will support efforts to optimize clinical trial design to speed the regulatory process and get products to patients faster. Without advances in regulatory science, promising therapies may be discarded during development because we lack the tools to recognize their potential and because outdated, inefficient review methods unnecessarily delay the approval of critical treatments. On the other hand, both significant dollars and many years may be wasted assessing a novel therapy that with better tools might be shown to be unsafe or ineffective at an earlier stage. I should emphasize that regulatory science comprises an array of disciplines and approaches. It takes place in laboratories, but it also involves clinical research and epidemiologic and statistical tools, things like bioimaging, and information gathering systems as well. Unlike work performed by specific sponsors or companies, regulatory science is important for multiple products and stakeholders. The knowledge generated from such studies informs a whole body of innovation rather than a single product. It will take new investments, approaches, and partnerships for regulatory science to evolve the way that biomedical and life sciences research has in recent times, but we must pursue it. Some $2.7 billion and over a decade of time was spent sequencing the human genome, which was successfully completed about 10 years ago. And yet, some 30 therapies or fewer actually have genetic tests as part of their labeling for guiding their use. That's why we need regulatory science. Even though we know that there are promising cell-based therapies for treating a variety of now incurable diseases, we still don't know how to define the right number of cells to infuse or what happens to these cells after they're placed in the body. And that's why we need regulatory science. We don't have good models for predicting toxicity in humans, which leads to a lot of time and money spent by biotech and pharmaceutical companies each year developing new therapies with a failure rate often as high as 90%. That's why we need regulatory science. We increasingly call on the safety-focused science of pharmacovigilance to use data sets and reported information to monitor the post-market environment for safety signals and risk concerns, but we still need meaningful strategies to quickly evaluate concerns and assure the proper balance of risks and benefits for patients. And that is why we need regulatory science. We need regulatory science to place the emerging, promising areas of science and technology fully at the service of public health. So how do we move forward? We make investments in projects driven by regulatory science that really work, and I want to give you a few examples. For one, FDA is working to optimize delivery and dosing of drugs and therapies so that patients receive the most benefit at the lowest risk. A case in point is the updated labeling for warfarin, a widely prescribed anticoagulant that about 2 million new American consumers take each year to prevent blood clots, heart attacks, and strokes. Warfarin's optimal dose varies and was known to be influenced by several factors, including a patient's age,